Titles. The first thing you hear and often see from a video game. A good title can make any game stand out, and one of the best ways to do that is to put a year in the title. Just look at all the sports games out there. The year is the only thing that makes those games stand out from each other. Putting a year in the title of your game can either signify the year that it was released in, or the year that the game takes place. While the former can be a good way to distinguish a game from any previous or future titles that may carry the same name, the latter is useful for informing players on what to expect from a game. A game with 1942 in its title probably isn't going to have some type of laser cannon for the player to use. That said, mentioning the year a game takes place in can also act to subvert player expectations, because what if you were able to use a laser cannon in 1942? This is especially true if a game series that traditionally takes place in one time period suddenly has the year of a completely different one in its title, as it now begs the question, how will that game series be portrayed in that time period? I'm sure this was a question we were all asking when we saw the 1999 update for Warframe. Warframe 1999, being the current biggest update for Warframe, takes the player out of a solar system far-flung into the future and puts them in the only slightly less futuristic year of 1999 in the world of Warframe. With this being the furthest we've ever gone back in the timeline of Warframe, and involving completely new, yet very important characters, 1999 sheds some light on some long-held questions about the mysterious past of the world of Warframe. Or at least, I assume it does. I haven't actually played it yet. To be honest, I'm really far behind on the story updates for Warframe. I haven't even played the new war yet. Yeah, I know it was like 2 years ago, but I just can't be bothered to grind for the materials for a necromech. It's also only slightly relevant to this video. With the 1999 update digging into the past of Warframe, I thought it would be relevant to talk about the past of Warframe myself. But I'm not talking about the past of Warframe as it is now. I'll save that for another much longer video. Instead, I'm going further back to when Warframe was only a concept by the name of Dark Sector. For those who only know the developers of Digital Extremes for Warframe, you might be surprised to know that they have made other games. I can't really blame you. Warframe is without a doubt their most successful IP and what they're primarily known for. However, they have indeed had their hands in several other games, most notably Bioshock 1 and 2, Darkness 2, and a few of the Unreal tournaments. Their lesser-known game of Dark Sector, however, is arguably the most pivotal game in their catalog, because it's the one game that brought us the Warframe we have today, and by extension, made Digital Extremes what it is. If you know anything about Warframe, then you might already know just how important Dark Sector was, and may have even seen the original concept trailer for Dark Sector/Warframe. I won't bore you with all the details of how one game led to the next. All you really need to know is the original concept for Dark Sector was basically that of Warframes, being a massive online multiplayer game where several factions fight for control over a war-torn solar system. However, unfortunately, this original concept was a little too ambitious during its original inception, the early 2000s, and no publishers had faith that Digital Extremes could pull it off. Also, the publishers basically said, hey, Gears of War is really popular, so could you tone down your ambitious and unique idea and make us something like Gears of War so we can make a lot of money? So fast forward a few years, and the ambitious sci-fi MMO set in a war-torn solar system was toned down to the Dark Sector we see today. A bit of a shell of the original idea, but despite the many flaws of this game, there were also quite a few ideas that, if they were fleshed out a bit more, could have led to a much better game. And technically they did. Alright, I'm gonna get this part out of the way now. If narrative in a video game is at all important to you, then you're going to be very disappointed by Dark Sector, because instead of playing as Hayden Tenno, a space-age super ninja fighting against various factions across the solar system, you play as Hayden Tenno, a morally questionable CIA agent trying to stop a deadly virus from spreading across Russia and potentially the world. I would go into more detail, but frankly there isn't much more detail to go into. Or at least none that the game bothers to tell you about. There are so many things that are left unanswered, vague, or just straight up not explained in this game. The virus this whole game revolves around, for example, leaves so many questions. All the game really tells you is that it is highly infectious, it mutates all those who come into contact with it, and a special chemical called interferon gas is highly effective against it. If they wanted to keep the specifics of the infection a mystery, that's fine, but there are too many questions about it that go unanswered. Like, why do some people turn into zombies and some don't? Where do the weapons and powers come from? Why was the Russian guy able to control the infection? Why was it found in the ocean? Unfortunately, that lack of information is basically a summation of the entirety of the story of this game, because the confusing mess of a plot in this game makes me feel like I missed one or two different games that came before it. This game's story is the equivalent of catching a movie at the final act or starting a TV series at the final season. It keeps making references or bringing in characters from past events that we have not seen, and the game makes no effort to elaborate or give any further context on. Nowhere is this more apparent than when the character Nadia is introduced. She has an unexplained, probably previously romantic relationship with Hayden, and she makes references to scenarios that we don't know about and never see, which she blames Hayden for. Hayden himself supposedly has a very sketchy background working for the CIA as a ruthless, potentially psychotic killer, which the game likes to keep bringing up as if we have any idea what it's talking about. They even try to give him some character development, but it's kind of hard to develop a character when most of his story was told off screen. I've had similar complaints about storytelling like this for games like Ninja Gaiden, but at least I can follow the story in those games, because despite throwing in random characters and lore, each game had its own condensed story that was built upon a fairly interesting world. Most of the story in Dark Sector seems to be relying on past events and character relationships, which honestly isn't the worst way to tell a story, as it can help to build mystery and suspense for what events we do see. However, normally there's some type of effort made to explain those previous events, so we as viewers get context and start to understand how things ended up as they are now. Moral of the story? Don't bring up past events in your story unless you're going to elaborate on it further in some way. This poor storytelling unfortunately bleeds into the mission structure as well, as they kind of just become go there and do this, okay now go here and do this. While the overall goal of stop evil Russian guy from releasing bioweapon is a solid initial goal to motivate you to keep moving forward, you kind of just go from one location to the next with only a small bit of story loosely connecting them and giving you a reason to actually be there. There were several times when I found myself asking, why am I on a boat? Why did I just go through an abandoned subway? Why am I in a graveyard? To be fair, that may have just been me not paying attention to the story, but it's not like the game gave me much story to pay attention to in the first place. Also, as a slight side tangent, I know that Dark Sector has yet to be confirmed as canon in Warframe, but it is my own headcanon that the virus in this game is the very early precursor to the infested virus in Warframe. So, if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that this game revolves around a pretty major gimmick. Though it can be pretty subtle. So I'll understand if you didn't immediately notice it. It's the glaive. It's the glaive. This game wants to know about the glaive. It wants to use the glaive. Most of the action in this game revolves around the glaive. For context, early on in the game, Hayden gets infected, and instead of mutating into some zombie, he gains access to this boomerang-like weapon called the glaive. Dark Sector was admittedly a little heavy-handed with how it marketed and portrayed the glaive, but that wasn't without reason. The gameplay on its own is just your average third-person cover shooter. Nothing particularly bad about that, just nothing very special either. The glaive, however, changes that. Aside from just looking cool and sounding satisfying, the glaive gives you access to various abilities that shake up that generic gameplay. You can throw the glaive at enemies to cleave them in two, pick up enemy weapons and other out-of-reach items, physically control and guide it towards enemies, and even charge it with different elemental effects. And as you progress, you gain more abilities like a shield, invisibility, and the ability to detonate a charged glaive. While it might be a bit of a strong gimmick, it's a darn good one, and it's also kind of what makes Dark Sector the game that it is. Now, this is a third-person shooter, so you do of course have access to other weapons outside of the glaive. Through the course of the game, you'll have access to several different weapons that you can buy at black market stores using money that you can find scattered around each level. You can also pick up enemy weapons, but they have sensors that prevent infected from using them for too long, so you can really only hold them for about 10 to 15 seconds before they fall apart in your hands. The enemy weapons can still be useful if you don't want to use any of your ammo or if you're low on ammo, but the timed sensors are a pretty clever way to push you to use the glaive and keep you from becoming too reliant on the dropped weapons. The black market weapons don't have these sensors though, so you can keep them for as long as you want. You can also further upgrade them with mods that can also be found around each level, which was no doubt a precursor to the weapon modding in Warframe. The problem with the black market weapons is that you can only buy them with money that you find around each level, and from selling unneeded weapons and mods, which normally wouldn't be a problem if money wasn't a limited commodity in this game. You actually have to find the money in this game. Sometimes the game puts it like right in your face, but for the most part, you have to go out of your way to look for money, which means if you can't find any or just don't bother to look for any, your access to the different weapons is going to be extremely stifled. This may have been done in an attempt to encourage players to look for secrets, but I have said this before, your progression in a game should not be tied to how many secrets you can find. And now admittedly, the black market weapons can be pretty busted if you get the right ones and use the right mods, so I can slightly understand why they may have wanted to limit your access to them, but that limited access doesn't really allow for much experimentation with the weapons. There's a point in this game where you will spend all of your money on one weapon and you will not be able to get any more after that because there's not enough money left in the game for you to buy anymore. You can still sell unwanted weapons and mods for money, but mods are one-time uses. If you use them on a weapon or sell them, they're gone for good. You can also find duplicates of mods, but there are only so many of them. And while black market weapons can be strong, not all of them are that good, so you may just waste mods and money on a weapon that turns out to suck. But again, the glaive picks up where the base weapons lack. By late game, the combined usage of your modded weapons and glaive abilities will have you chewing through enemies. Well, the game starts off slow, throwing your generic soldier and zombie enemies at you while you adjust to the glaive/gun combat. As you progress, getting more weapons and abilities, combat starts to become pretty engaging. With enemies evolving with you as you go on, you have to start getting smart with how you use your glaive and abilities, along with your weapons and ammo consumption/mod usage. There are some areas where the combat kind of drags on a bit, but for the most part, it's enjoyable. My biggest complaint about the gameplay is the movement. This game may be a third-person shooter, but it is no Gears of War. While I'm not going to call them tank controls, controlling Hayden feels like I'm moving around some large vehicle with terrible handling. I'm pretty sure this is mainly because Hayden is primarily built to move forward, and any movement outside of that feels very slow and awkward. It also hinders the stealth/execution mechanic in the game. Not that you have a lot of opportunities to get close to enemies in the first place, but Hayden moves way too slow to truly take advantage of the execution mechanic. You would think that the invisibility you get later on would help you with that, but again, the slow movement really only makes it good for repositioning. This is where I say that if the game fleshed out these features a bit more, it would have been much better. Aside from needing a much better story, I actually think this game would have benefited a lot from an upgrade system. Something that would have allowed you to upgrade your glaive abilities, such as increasing how long you can charge a glaive with an element, or increasing the strength of your shield, as well as character upgrades like increasing your maximum health or movement speed. Unfortunately, I don't think any of that would have helped with the bosses. The bosses, while clever in their design, requiring you to use the glaive in creative ways to try to defeat them, don't quite live up to the standard that I think that they wanted them to. Mainly because the game makes no effort to tell you how to actually fight them. Most of the bosses have some type of gimmick that you need to exploit in order to deal damage to them, but you kind of have to guess what you have to do to exploit that gimmick. More often than not, this just takes trial and error until you finally find out what you're supposed to do. I kind of see what they were trying to go for, but normally those types of bosses give you some hint as to what you're supposed to do to hurt them. It also doesn't really help that this game isn't very good at giving damage feedback, so it's hard to tell if I'm actually hurting them or just mildly stunning them. I think Dark Sector's initial failure and its eventual transformation into Warframe acts as a small lesson. While the big idea of Dark Sector may not have been as successful as Digital Extremes wanted it to be, they didn't let that demoralize them and stop them from trying again. It took them a second try to start finding success, and even then they still had to continue to work on it. In all honesty, Dark Sector would have had a much more tragic story if we didn't get Warframe out of it. This very well could have been one of those games that began as a cool idea, but turned out as a shell of the original concept and never went any further than that, possibly even leading to the end of the development company. Luckily, though, Digital Extremes never gave up on the original concept, and we still got what I believe to be one of the best free-to-play games/MMOs out there. So, keep refining and improving on whatever you're working on, until it's something that you're happy with. Then, let your experience from that help you on the next project. That said, while Dark Sector may not have been a fully realized idea, I enjoy it for what it was able to pull off. While I don't think Dark Sector will get a remake or sequel anytime soon, as Digital Extremes has their hands pretty full with Warframe, plus it's basically a spiritual successor to Dark Sector, I would be more than happy to see them go at it again. With everything they know now and all the experience they have from Warframe, I just know a remake or a sequel would fix and improve so much of what the original tried to do. Someday I would like to make a whole video on Warframe too, but the Foundry lets you build all your weapons in Warframes, but you need materials first. Everything costs money in this game, and what doesn't cost money and materials. Modding. Each Warframe has their own unique abilities that can be modded. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's start talking about the basics. I don't care what I'm saying. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about there, to say the least, so I'll save that for some time in the future. Anyway, thanks to everyone who bothered to listen to me for this long. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I will see you in the next one.